Morning, everybody. Welcome to Hire Mama Mastermind. I'm Shira Litzar, joined by my colleague, Brent Schillinger. Happy to help answer your job search questions. So who's got a question? Who's got a topic? We will jump on in with you. Becky, you look like you're about to launch into some.
I think I always do, right? Well, so to continue my story with trying to change careers or to revert back to my original career, I've been applying. I'm getting unemployment, and so I'm required to look for jobs. But obviously, I also want to find jobs, and so I joined this Flex Jobs because they seem to have a lot of remote part-time work. And so I found there was a job that came up a couple days ago, and it was an accounting position, and it was for this company that provides accounting services to clients, right? It's kind of like the ones that we had talked about last week. And so I applied. I don't know if anyone has had this experience before, but I actually was tested in my accounting skills. I had to do a video, and they warn you like right up front and say, oh, this is not for the faint of heart. Like, this is going to be a long process. And like, I still didn't think that it was going to be that long because I had appointments. So I had to leave. I had a physical therapy appointment. Anyway, I did this test, which was awesome because it really helped me see where my skills are and what I have for skills. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. I didn't know if anyone else had ever had to encounter any kind of process like that. It's much more extreme than anything I've ever had to do before. Sometimes, a lot of times it's just putting in your resume, and your cover letter. But this was, and they allowed 75 minutes for this exam. There were 53 questions. So.
I mean, it's good that I think that they did that. It's for you and for them, right? Just to test your skills. Yeah, you're right. It's a little unusual. And from a recruiter standpoint, in Indeed, and I think in LinkedIn, they do have, not what you're talking about, but they do allow the employer to put in some not tests necessarily, but at least to say, how many years of this do you have? Do you have these skills? Da, 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 da. I think that they might, now that I'm thinking about it, they might actually have a test or two baked in, but you're right. It's unusual.
And indeed, they do have tests with behavioral questions and really the whole spectrum of tests I think you can possibly imagine. So,
I've had the same thing.
Yeah.
Some years ago, Go ahead, Vern.
Okay, some years ago, my daughter went through a video interview where she was given the questions, and it was a company called HireView, and basically they were recording the interview as a vendor for the company, and they would send the interview to the company. And for some questions, she was given the question, she had to answer. She couldn't edit it. She couldn't do anything with it. Other questions, she was able to say, if you didn't like your answer, delete it and re-record it. And then to your point, Becky, at the end of it, she's in training and development. They gave her a scenario about making pizza, and here's the tools you have, and here's what you have, and design a training program. Just an outline. They just didn't have to go in detail, but outline a training program. So, I mean, to Shira's point, the employer, again, trying to minimize risk, right? They want to know as much as possible about your skills and behaviors to make the decision that they think is going to be the best hire. So I'm surprised that those video interviews, I don't know, well, of course, Zoom came along. So I don't know if those other companies are still even in business anymore.
It actually leads me to jump off to a related point, right? And that has to do with what I'll call the mutual vetting process. So employers will vet you, right? They need to know, can you, have you, blah, 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 right? Fine. That's their job. What's interesting though, is that you have a side of, you got your perspective as well. Figuring out whether you're qualified for the role and interested in the role, both, can be a very interesting process. And one of the ways you can do that is by really looking at the way they are screening you, starting with the job description, and then whatever they're asking you, whether it's pre-test questions or whatever it is, or certainly the interview questions. When employers write in the job description, what employers ask in the interview, they're not asking those things, and they're not telling you those things for their health. There's a real reason why they are saying what they're saying. So there was somebody I was working with recently who realized, right, that in vetting the job description, we worked on this job description together, or we're trying to customize the resume, and we really, really parsed it out together. And we're like, this is going to be a stretch. This is just, but we, neither one of us, I don't think, really in the beginning of the vetting process of looking at this job, we were just sort of casual, like, oh, well, sure, the person can do this, they could do that. But then when we really, really like pulled it and stretched it and looked at the words, and the employer said, we want skills A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And the job seeker, my client, was like, well, I've got A and B and D and E. But there were those other letters in there that the person didn't have. And when we really evaluated, we're like, you know what? This is going to be too much of a stretch. But we wouldn't have seen that had we just kind of just done a gloss over. Mm-hmm. Really, really read the job description. Really, I would say, analyze the job description. Don't scan it. Analyze it. What do they really need from you? Because when you're in your profession, you've seen, just like they've seen 100 resumes that look like yours, you've seen 100 jobs that look like theirs. Mm-hmm. It's easy for both sides to do the glossy thing. Yeah, what's another Judah graphic designer? What's another Elizabeth teacher? Whatever, okay? There's subtleties, there's nuances, because in every profession, there are different emphases. Becky, you look at an accounting role, what in the world does that mean? Is it more of a financial analyst? Is it more bookkeeping? Does it have an operations lens to it? Right? You really, Sally, you look at education jobs. Is it more curriculum design? Hey, by the way, is it a small association? They really need you to be a meeting planner too. The employer has their business needs, and sometimes they do a smorgasbordy thing. They kind of put all the vegetables in the pot, and they think that somebody's actually going to be that kind of soup. What? You're a carrot more than a celery stick, right? You got to know that about yourself. That doesn't mean you can't learn, but if you really analyze it, it might just be that you're like, you know what they're looking for is just more than what I really have to offer right now. I can learn, but is it too much of a step? What I said to the job seeker was, I said, is the difference between taking a step up versus going up a floor, or the person said to me, or going up a flight of stairs. Like what really is the leap here? Taking a step is fine. Maybe 2 steps, right? You can stretch a little bit, but if they want you to go up a flight of stairs, or if they need you to climb a floor in terms of the gap in your skills, know that, because you want to be set up for success for yourself and for themselves. So it's not to say you shouldn't go after these things. And if it's at least 80% on, go for it. I don't mean it has to be 1000% match, but really analyze it to see, is this something you're really qualified for? Is this something you're really interested in? What is the scope of the role? Without glossing, actually do a real line by line, word for word. Does that make sense? It can save you a lot of time. And then,
well, and as part of that analysis, when you see this skill, okay, what have I done in my career? What examples could I give for this skill? Start to be thinking about those stories that you're going to create to when they ask you a question, you're going to be able to to relate a story that specifically speaks to that skill, the outcome you achieved, and that's all part of the analysis and being prepared for the interview.
That's exactly right. So it's not just you vetting it, it's also you preparing for using it to prepare for the interview. And a good way to do that is, you could even go old fashioned and print it out, right? Print out your resume, print out the job description, and go line by line. Where have I done these things? Where have I not? Do I have light experience, heavy experience? Do I have an accomplishment story that relates to bullets A, B, C, D? And if I don't, and if they ask me a question about it, how am I going to address it? Right? Maybe I've been exposed to it. Maybe I'm really interested in it and I'm willing to learn it or whatever. Maybe I can ask a follow-on question to say, how important is that skill set to my success? Is that something I can learn? Because just because they have 15 bullets on the job description does not mean they're all equally weighted. Hello? They're not all equally weighted. There's some of them, and they're not going to percentile and say, well, this is 50% of the job. But I can tell you that the first 3 or 4 bullets is really the focus of the role. They're putting that first because that's top of mind. Once they get to the bottom, it's usually less important. And that's almost like the other duties as assigned, kind of falls in that category. So the first 3 or 4 bullets, but even so, you can ask some really good questions of the employer around, what's priority, what skill sets do I need to have to minimize my learning curve, to be successful quickly? What's the focus here? What is the must-have? What are the must-have skills? What are the nice-to-have skills? You can ask those things. We recruiters do that all the time. We ask the employer, what are the must-haves? What are the nice-to-haves? Because if we're going to go look for a candidate, they might say to us, oh, well, they at least have to have blah, blah. Okay, fine. We know. If they have this other stuff, that's very nice, but they can learn it. But they're not going to say that in the job description. You have to ask the questions.
Judah. You just triggered a thought that I had.
I'm sorry, Judah, 1 second. Nathan, you're here, but you're not here.
Sorry,
we can't see you.
Sorry. I know. I'm out of USB ports and I cannot plug in my camera this morning. So I am here though. Can you hear me okay or not?
Yeah.
Right.
The audio. Is the audio?
Nathan, can you see any of us?
Oh yes. Yeah.
You can. Okay. All right. So if it's okay, Judah actually had raised his hand, so I'll have Judah go first, then Nathan, you can go second. Okay?
All right. I didn't see that. Yep.
No worries. Okay, Judah.
Yeah, just to talk to Rebecca's point, I had been tested. Now, again, I'm a graphic and web designer, so it's pretty skill-based. So I've actually had to go through like a whole bunch of a whole series of tests. And then, of course, I can have an option to prove myself as an expert and go through tests on typography or web design or whatever it is that I could then submit to the employer. So that they offer you to gauge yourself as an expert in a particular field. Maybe it's for you for Quick In or for or for whatever it might be. So that's been my experience. But for this job description thing, this is really in my field especially. Again, I think everything Shira has said is totally awesome, and same with Vern, and those all for sure apply. And from my experience, also in my field, they will just kitchen sink it, and they'll say, you got to be able to do printing, you got to be able to do, just web design, programming, and sometimes they'll even list programs that I know are, that haven't been used in 10 years. So I know that whoever's writing this is not the person who's going to hire me. And again, I don't know how this, works out into the fields of everybody here. And I did have an interview with an organization. I talked to the art director, and I said to him, I probably shouldn't have, but I said, this is a pretty deep job description, so really, this is more than 40 hours a week, and this is 3 or 4 people. And he goes, yeah, because he was actually quite upset that they had put that much into this particular job description, because it was was over the top in a way. And I've heard for so many people, and I'm sure Cher's got a lot of stories about this, that they're asking for someone who doesn't exist. Right. They really are, and they're just covering every possible. In my field, they call it a unicorn. Unicorn, someone who can design and program and do all this stuff. They don't, occasionally you'll have one of these, geniuses, but essentially they don't exist. But I think, and sometimes it seems tricky to Shira's point about, what do they really want? I think you can, for me, I have had some that were clearly just almost machine generated. Like, this is not really, they don't even know what they're talking about. I should definitely apply because they don't even know what they want. And then sometimes they're real specific. And like I said, I know they want something, and which is great for me, because if I don't have it, then I can just say, okay, they totally need me to be an expert in this particular field. And I know that that's something I see in a lot of job descriptions. So that's, I think an example of, no, this is too much of a reach for me. Everybody wants a SharePoint developer, and I haven't touched SharePoint, so I'm not even going to pretend on that account. But when they throw the whole bunch of things in there, I could easily learn this other skill. So anyway, that's my experience, and I don't know how useful it is. That translates to other fields.
It's interesting, Judah, and Nathan, I do remember you're there. So it's interesting because there's what they list in the responsibilities, and then there's what they list in the qualifications.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, of course, people write these job descriptions differently. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no standardized way of doing it. And plus, is it the hiring manager who's writing? It's the HR person, whatever. Are they looking for a unicorn? Should they be looking for a unicorn? Do look at the qualifications. Don't not look at the soft skills, because if they have some soft skills in there, they're just naturally not your personality. Just know that. But don't really look as much at the soft skills when you're vetting at the first cut of, am I qualified, right, and interested? Look at the hard skills, the functional skills that they say, we really want someone to have A, B, C. Now they will say sometimes we prefer PDQ, whether that's industry background or a skill set. Preferred often means required. And I don't mean literally, it's just that they literally are preferring that. So they're going to keep looking for that person, ideally. Doesn't mean you shouldn't apply. Just keep that in mind. And so when you're vetting these skills, just, really suss out that qualification. So going back to the example I gave you about this job seeker, what was interesting is what finally got to us both, where we really realized, like, oh, this is probably not the right fit, was not in the responsibility section. It was in the qualifications, because there were these 2 bullets in the qualifications section that specifically said, we want demonstrated experience in PD and Q. And it was exactly the PD and Q that this job seeker didn't really have. And that's what said to us, wait a second, they literally like put neon lights around this. That says that the focus of the job is actually going to be in that direction. So there was just actually no question about it. And that's actually made us decide not to have this person pursue it, right? So look at the quals. Even though sometimes the quals are very generic, but if there's any specificity there, focus in on it. Okay.
Yeah, my Achilles heel in there, what I see all the time is TSI security clearance with polygraph. That I'm like, oh, darn it.
And that's government contractor language,
Yeah. And you go through, like, exactly like you said, you go through a whole bunch of stuff, and then it's kind of right there at the bottom. It's just going,
by the way,
you need security clearance, non-negotiable. So
don't ignore that stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I always use the phrase job descriptions are written for the walk on water candidate.
That's right.
Okay?
Great.
That's it, right.
Exactly.
And there is no such candidate, right?
No, but be thoughtful. So again, it doesn't mean don't apply, but if you
Yeah.
do, be aware that they might be screening you out because of this, and you might have a learning curve because of that. So just be thoughtful about that. All right, Nathan.
The walk on water comment was so accurate. I'm sitting here thinking, yes, I've applied to too many jobs that they've asked for everything. You have to have 50 years of experience to cover everything. Anyway, so you did trigger a thought, and I'm not sure who brought it up, whether it was Vern or Bishar, but I used to send my cover letters, and I would include a table. So let's say there's 3 to 5 of the main requirements. And then this table I would build would basically be their job requirement, and then an example of what I've done to achieve that.
Right.
I've stopped doing that. Do you have an opinion on, it was time consuming, obviously. So
In
do you
the
have an
cover
opinion
letter?
on,
Yeah,
right.
I do have an opinion, and Vern, I'd like to hear yours as well. So there's what Nathan is talking about is a cover letter style. It opens up with normal stuff, paragraph or 2 about, maybe why you're interested, or maybe how you align with the mission or whatever. But then after that paragraph or 2, you actually have a table with 2 columns. Column 1 says something like your requirements. Column 2 says my qualifications. And you go through the job description and you list what they need, what you have. It actually is a very thoughtful way of writing a cover letter. And frankly, I believe that employers appreciate that. I know I do when people do that with me, because it says you took the time to make sure that you line up with what we're looking for. You've been thoughtful, you cared, you took the extra time, all of that. So we generally like it. The other version that I use when because y'all know I'm a coach and I help people with resumes and cover letters, whatever, that when there's a sample cover letter, actually, let me bring it up because I can. Hold on. I do something, it's not,
Well,
it's
doing that.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, while you're doing that, it's funny we're talking about the testing. I actually had an Indeed test pop up yesterday, and just a warning to the group that Indeed test was very misleading on the front end. Said it'd be like 10 minutes or so. It was actually about a 30-minute test, and it was actually rather difficult. They should have made some recommendations, like get a calculator before you start this test. So just be aware.
So here's a sample. This is a real cover letter that I sanitized. And so here, so I'm going to show you the whole thing. So the opening paragraph here basically says, this is just a way to do a cover letter, right? You don't have to do it this way, but this is, I think, a good, thoughtful way. This is, in this case, the person's commitment to their mission. The person reading the job description saying, it looks like you are looking for someone who can do blah, blah, blah. And by the way, here's what I can do. Okay. So sort of a, broad, I'm connected to the mission. Next level down, here's what looks like you're looking for. Number 3, right? Here's what I can do. But more to Nathan's point, instead of doing a table, which again is fine, the other way to do it is to go through the job description and pull out the key competency. So normally it's not going to say something as simple as this, just management. It might say, I don't know, board relations, or it might be event planning, or it might be financial analysis. There's usually two word competencies. And then you give either one of two things, either an overarching general description of, and generally speaking, with financial analysis, my experience is XYZ, or you go through your resume and you pull out a very specific accomplishment story and put it into first person. So let's say it's, the competency is board relations, all right? And maybe the accomplishment story you had in your job, in your resume, was that you spearheaded, strategic planning, thing, or you redid their governance or their bylaws or whatever. And of course, in resumes, you don't use first person. Nobody does, right? It's third person, spearheaded, blah, 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 designed, blah, blah, blah. You could literally take that bullet and flip it into first person. I spearheaded, I designed. And that's a way to answer that, to label that out. Or again, you can do it generically, but either way, it's really the same concept, Nathan. And I'm not vying for either one, but this will actually save you a little bit of time, because the implication is this is the requirement. The requirement is you wanted, I don't know, communication strategy, boom. And then you're actually saying, here's an accomplishment, or here's my, general experience that speaks to it. So instead of doing 2 tables where you're listing out requirements, you're just taking the requirement and putting it into a 1 or 2 word label. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do like this format. What I was starting to type was the formatting of the table.
Yeah,
would sometimes get more complex than what I
and it
wanted to
needs
deal
to
with.
be.
So I do like this.
This is simple.
format. Yeah, thank you.
Simple. Yep. And by the way, if anybody wants this, I'm happy to send it as a sample. So feel free to email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat for those who are watching this on video. My email is shira@purposefulhire.com, purposefulhire.com.
I worked with Jane Doe on a project as well. Yeah, she's a great client.
And you should, we're gonna send you for a stand-up job at the Improv. Vern, did you have any comments on cover letters?
No, it's exactly what you said. And other than I do think that's a great way to begin the recruiting process from the employees, from the candidate standpoint. In other words, and a lot of people, will say, oh, nobody reads cover letters. Well, Shira and I both read cover letters. So
Yeah.
and
Some people do. Little
yeah.
bit percentage, but some people actually do. See,
the problem for the job seeker is, you can send 100 resumes and 98 cover letters won't get read, but the two that do get read
Are
might
really right.
actually help you get the interview. So,
Exactly. Yeah, so do it. And, do it when it's the job that you're really putting your whole heart into. You really, really are interested. Show them that you're really interested. Take the extra time. Yeah, Ty and then in.
If I see in a job description like a software that I don't know, but I really am interested in applying for the job, I will say, learned another software and da 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 da, which might be similar or different. And then I'll say willing to learn or willing to train.
Yeah, that's helpful. Great. In.
So after the interview, you send a thank you letter or email. What is the right protocol? So let's say it was a panel interview.
Mhm.
I've been up to date, replying by email or putting them in an email, all three of them together. I sometimes CC like the HR manager or like the HR, the higher, the talent acquisition person, and also like maybe the hiring manager who may not have participated in it, so that everyone knows that so is that is that the right protocol? Should it be a letter? I mean, I'm not sure what.
No. Yeah, no, these days, well, first of all, back pre-COVID, a letter, even pre-COVID, I was always a little hesitant with letters because of the expediency of it. So in other words, people expect that they're going to get a thank you note within 24 hours. And of course, if you mail something, it takes a week. So that's right.
Yeah.
Although back pre-COVID, and you could still do this now for those when you're doing an in-person, I used to say, the extra step is to actually bring a thank you card with you, leave the meeting, and write it out, bring it back upstairs and hand it to the receptionist if they have one, which of course a lot of people don't these days. So that's just like an extra nice step, but that's rare when you can do that. No, absolutely email, number one. Number two, yes, CC who you feel is appropriate. Okay. Number three, which you didn't ask, but I'm just going to address it, is if you have multiple interviews, meaning if there was a panel, do you send one note or multiple? Very clear answer, one note. And the reason is you're supposed to send one thank you note per meeting, not per person, because it was a conversation. So you're addressing the conversation,
right?
Whoever was in the room. Now, if you went and you had one one after the other, and it wasn't a panel, send 3 notes, because you need to personalize it. You talked about, you had one conversation with person A, a slightly different with person B and person C. You talked about different things. So you address those differences, personalize it for whoever you're talking to.
Yeah.
Vern, any thoughts on that?
no, I'm just agree. No, it's the way to do it.
Yeah. Ty and then Elizabeth.
Right or wrong, I had a panel interview, and I asked during the interview, who's the point person I'd like to send a thank you letter. One of the panelists, the director, which was the higher one up, handed me a business card. The other one said, well, I will send you the rest of the email addresses. And they did it next day. And I sent them the thank you. So I don't know if that was right or wrong. That's the way I did it.
Always ask for the email addresses of the people you interviewed with. It's the most normal thing. You should be doing it. They'll expect you to do it. It's yes, they should not be holding back on that. Yeah, that's very normal. Yeah. Elizabeth?
Where do you find suitable thank you notes?
Oh, I mean, actual thank you cards. I mean, these days, a lot of retailers are, I don't know, but I just go to Amazon, I would just say business thank you cards. And there's usually some pretty ones that just say thank you in gold or something like that. Just blank inside. Yeah.
I usually find mine at Staples or Kinko's.
Yeah.
What was the other store?
Kinko's.
Kinko's, yeah. Staples, Kinko's, Office Depot, FedEx might have them. I don't know. They have a lot of office supplies if you want to do the retail. Yeah, and that is it. Again, it is a very nice touch. I'll tell you, many years ago, I remember doing an executive search, and we had 2 days of interviews, and in a hotel, and the search committee was there, right? So they had back-to-back interviews over 2 days. Anyway, so one of the candidates on day one came back to the hotel and had handwritten thank you notes for every single person on the search committee, had the concierge put it in the mailbox, whatever, like make sure that the people in the different rooms got it. The next morning at breakfast, the search committee's like, did you all get that private personal note from Michael? Oh my gosh, that was so cool. You know, they were just floored that somebody took the time to handwrite them a note and come back and make sure that they all got a personal hand delivery. It was, you know, small, but very powerful. So if there's anything like that you can think of, that would be it. You don't have to. And if you just send an email, it's fine. But that's the kind of the vanilla, Breyer's vanilla ice cream. Tastes good, right? But if you want Rocky Road, nuts and marshmallows, you might think of an extra personalized stuff. So, Vivian, good to see you here.
Hi, I have a question. My name got put forward to the CEO of an association, and the person sent my resume and kind of put whatever cover letter they had, and I had not even seen the description of the position, but they thought I was a great match, and so it came from a person high enough at the Department of Commerce to the person, and I realized that they probably would not have done all of the cover letter components as I would have. So I did go back and did my own cover letter, and looking at the job description, etc., and putting all of the key points. I was just concerned that it was almost overkill because 3 people reached out to them on my behalf.
No,
I just did
not
not
overkill.
want them to
No,
just think that I'm going, pushing it too hard,
Nope,
because
nope.
that was spontaneous, not
No.
from me.
No, not at all. You can have 5 people, you can have 17 people. It is fine. I mean, it just shows the employer, all of these people actually are they are championing Vivian. She must be a something. Okay. In fact, so years ago, I was on a panel here. So here's what's happened. It was me and several recruiters. Okay. And we were giving a presentation to a bunch of, watch this, to a bunch of human resource job seekers. That makes sense? So the people in the room were human resources professionals. They were all job seekers. We were recruiters advising HR people on their job search, right? And that blows your mind, but that's true. That's what happened. It was a SHRM chapter meeting. Anyway, I remember this like it was yesterday. Each of us recruiters were going through, job search strategies, blah, blah, blah. And this one recruiter, Vivian, said the very thing. She said, you know what? She goes, there was this one time where a person, championed my candidacy, and then another person and another person, 5 people. She said the employer was so positively overwhelmed, like, okay, she must be a rock star, and she got hired, right? Because it wasn't too much. It was just reaffirming that this person, Vivian, is somebody who this employer should see. And it just keeps it's like, it's like reference checking. How many references does an employer check? Usually at least 3, because they want testimony after testimony to reaffirm. They don't just go with 1. They normally want at least 3 to really make sure that indeed, that it just, again, it affirms everything. So Vivian, if 5 people do it, wonderful.
and again, this goes back to what Shira says all the time about employers trying to minimize the risk. So if I'm the hiring manager and I'm hearing about all of these positive things about
Right.
Vivian,
Wonderful.
it's helping minimize all these people are saying she's got these skills, she's done these things, whatever they're saying. It's giving me a sense of, well, I'm minimizing some of my risk here. There's a lot of people that says she's really good. So definitely, it certainly will help get you the interview, hands down, if you're in that situation.
And it really is like now that I think about it, it really is like a pre-reference. In fact, I had an employer once where this happened, where she, her colleague, somebody she had worked with, I guess, at another organization, referred a candidate through me, right, to the employer. And because this other colleague made the referral, my client trusted the opinion of her colleague So much so it was really like, it was almost like a standalone reference. Before even the interview, she said, oh, so-and-so referred her. Oh, she must be great. Like just like that. So that whole trusted colleague thing really matters to employers, which I would say almost even more so than the references, because you, the candidate, are providing your references. But if somebody that they trust actually recommends you, that actually holds even more weight.
So here's a personal example. The last job I had with the American Bankers Association, an executive coach was asked to do the search. And what she said to them, because I had worked for her earlier in my career, they said, do you know some qualified candidates? And she gave them my name and she said, Vern would be qualified for this job. She said, he's got a great job right now. I have no idea whether he's interested or not. And she called me that night and said, I just want to let you know I dropped your name. That was on a Thursday. On a Friday, I got an email from the CFO who wanted to talk to me about the job. And I know that was based on her reputation was so impeccable that if she said somebody was good, they just believed her. And I ended up getting that job, but it certainly was going to get me the interview. So
it's relationship based.
Yeah.
It just is. It's not that people won't hire, sight unseen, a plain, an unfamiliar resume, but when you have somebody championing you, I can't even explain to you how important that is in terms of them thinking well of you, right?
Yeah.
Becky?
So I want to flip this around from we're doing everything that we possibly can to get this job, right? We're looking at the job description, we're reaching out to people, we're doing all of this, but how do we find out about the culture of the place? How do we know if we would be a good fit there if the person that recommended you doesn't have exact knowledge of that place? Right. They just know that you're
the person
and they're connected to that person, right?
Vern, I'm going to have you address that first because I have some particular things to say.
Okay. And that's a very important question, Becky. It really is. Every organization has a culture, and every organization, whether they admit it or not, has a culture by default. I mean, a culture is, how do things happen around here? What are the behaviors? People have all of these values, written on the wall. Do the people leadership down to the, receptionist actually exhibit those behaviors and values on a day-to-day basis? And I can tell you, for the vast majority of companies, they fall short on those values. I'm sorry, they just do. So ways to find that out is, through your network, can you find people who either are working there or used to work there and have an informational interview with them about the culture and what the culture is like? Obviously, you go to Google and get as much information off of Google about the company or about the organization as you can. And then, like I said, to your point, it's really important to you. The two most important things in a job, in my sense, is who is your boss and what's your relationship with your boss. That's going to make a whole whether you're really happy or miserable, and the culture, what goes on in that organization. So
sure. Think of it this way, okay? I'm just going to give it two different concepts. Try to distinguish culture versus interpersonal dynamics. So let me describe it this way. There are some organizations, some companies that actually have a very defined culture. Some of you have been on this call a long time, have once in a while heard me talk about Amazon. And I always bring up Amazon just because they're very extreme in this. They're very, very defined. So if anybody knows anything about Amazon, they're very open about this, okay? So they have this thing called the 14 leadership principles. You can Google it. And it's all these different values that they vet people on. And to me, all those 14 leadership principles amount to two words that sum up the entire culture. And that is challenge everything. Amazon is a challenge everything culture. You are not entitled, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, like, and I actually vetted an HR person who told me, yes, this is the truth. You are not entitled to have your own opinion. You have an opinion, but somebody is required to shoot it down. Literally, to make it better. And then another person has to shoot that down to make it better. That's why Amazon's sort of taken over the world, right? Like, who thought that Amazon would actually own Whole Foods, right? Really? Well, that's because it's always about this better, 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 innovative, innovator. That's their culture. You've got to know that if you're going to work for Amazon. It's very defined, it's public. Okay, there are some people who've got the resilience for that. Some people who don't. No problem. That's cultural. A law firm has a certain culture. Yeah, like there's just cultures, right? But the interpersonal dynamic thing, that changes and varies. And it's not just interpersonal dynamics, it's, maybe there's been restructuring, there's a new CEO, things change overarchingly, departmentally, and with that specific supervisor and people and teammates. Some of this is more open than others, right? Like, you might know stuff just going on over there. Ooh. Sometimes it's just, look, you might hear, like, some people read Glassdoor. Glassdoor is good and it's not good all at the same time, because sometimes, sure, and you might give you some insight. On the other hand, it's usually only going to be disgruntled people who could be disgruntled for things that have nothing to do with your job, nothing to do with your department, nothing to do with your supervisor. You might have a great supervisor, right? And by the way, organizations are not inanimate objects. It's full of people. Cultures change, dynamics change, relationships change. You get a new CEO and all of a sudden, the whole environment changes. Somebody recently, said to me, oh, I'm applying for organization X. Now, 20 years ago, literally, I heard that organization X had just an unbelievable kind of a culture. But things change. Now organization X actually is apparently a pretty good place to work. Okay, things change. Yesterday, I got an email from a coaching client. He said, hey, Shira, do you know anything about the Association of ABC? Well, I know a lot of associations, so I understand why he asked me that. And as it happens to be, I do. I know two people, one of whom I actually placed in another job, two people who work there. And I called him. I didn't text him, I didn't email him. I said, look, I said, just got to let you know, two people. I said, they both say that this place is a hot mess right now. And he goes, oh, well, yeah, I understand there's a new CEO. I said, however, you never know, right? Could be department, things are new CEO, right? Could be changing for the better. The department you work for, maybe, but we both agreed, proceed with caution. Some intel, but not all the intel he can make. And besides which, I said to him, look, I said, maybe you are the light in the darkness that they need. That's going to help them with their culture change. So just because you hear some things that are not maybe 100% positive about an organization doesn't mean that you couldn't be the one to be the change agent. Or maybe that team works. But again, things change. People change. The supervisor that you remember, there's a lot of turnover these days. It's not like people stay for 15 years much anymore. So you come in, your supervisor could be leaving next year, right? A new one, or maybe a better one comes in, or a worse one. So this is really as much about your flexibility and your ability to adapt to new cultures and new environments, and having emotional intelligence, and being a great team player, and you being the positive light there, and let God work through you, right? So that you're the one who's bringing God's love, into that organization. Great. So listen, but also take some things with a grain of salt, because you never know how you are going to personally fit in. Does that make sense? Cool. Ty and then Judah.
I would also consider who's saying it, how long they've been there. If it's a relatively new employee, they might have a different take than somebody that's been there 15 years.
Yep. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Judah?
Yeah, a couple of quick things. First of all, this ties into Shira's. Shira connected me with a senior vice president at Booz Allen Hamilton, a company I was interested in working with. And he said, well, if Shira said, I thanked him, and he said, well, if Shira makes a suggestion, because I know I got to jump. So whatever you're doing with Paul, keep doing that. So that was awesome. So this ties in perfectly. I'll give a perfect example from what you're just going over. He's a senior vice president. He's in a different department than what I would be, which is graphic design and branding and all that sort of stuff. But he was talking about the different, first of all, whether it was in-house serving Booz Allen as a designer versus serving one of their clients. So Booz Allen Hamilton, I'm guessing everybody knows, it's a consultant agency. So I could work for them as a consultant for one of their clients or being hired internally. And he says, and those are very different cultures, very, very different experiences. And then he was talking about the different, even within there was the the Charleston, South Carolina office, and there's 2 in Texas, and those are very different, and they have a different culture within themselves. So his thought was then to connect me to, it was the person who was the head of branding for all of Booz the last 15 years, who's now with another company. He says, well, maybe you could connect to this guy. He could tell you what it was actually like, because he's no longer working there. He'll be straight ahead with you and tell you about the culture. And then as I'm learning from all of you here about following up, with other people within an organization, I have a connection with somebody who actually knows a graphic designer who works in Booz Allen. So I'm taking that tack as well. So I think that there's a lot of, so that's my example. Hopefully that is a case study, what Sherry was just talking about. With especially a large organization like Booz Allen, how there can be many levels of the culture, and then we just have to be sleuth our ways into, to try and contact people who could enlighten us as to, and then of course just somehow get your foot in the door and find out for yourself.
Keep networking, Judah.
Yeah, Taver.
Yeah.
And even look at this call. And what Judith mentioned has nothing to do with me personally. I'm just going to use myself as an example. So right now I'm just your colleague. Forget that I host this thing. I'm just your colleague, right? I happen to know this guy Paul, who happens to work at Booz Allen. Nothing to do with what I do. He's a client, but you would never, Judah and Nathan, you would have, because I introduced both Judah and Nathan to this person. You wouldn't know stepping to this call that I happen to have this random connection to somebody at Booz Allen. But when you guys were talking about what you're like, oh, you mentioned, I think Judah, you actually mentioned Booz, and Nathan, I forget why. Oh, that's right, because you're in project management and Paul's in project management. I just connected the dots, right? All of you, first of all, can do that for each other, and I hope you do. Please do that, right? But also be listening for where you can, where somebody else can make some sort of strategic introduction. You never know. Just because somebody isn't from your sector, doesn't do what you do, doesn't mean they don't know other people. It could be their next door neighbor. It could be the person they go to church with. It could be their client. It could be whomever. So even generic groups like this can offer a lot of helpful, referrals, which it makes me think that we probably need to keep going. Maybe not every time, but go back around the circle and have everybody, say what they're looking for. Because that's actually how that connection happened, right? Because remember, Jude, I'm like, what are y'all looking for? He said, oh, I want to get into Booz. And I'm like, oh, I know somebody at Booz. So let's make sure that we do that more often, and make sure that you're specifically saying not only what kind of job you're looking for, what kind of sector, if you are sector specific, but also specific organizations. And then could be that some of us on this call might have some connections there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like
not only on this call, but as you're networking with others. Again, you've heard me say teaching and giving, 1,000 times. And part of your job search, you need to do as much teaching of other people as possible. And you're teaching them about, obviously you're teaching them, first of all, you're in job search, you're in transition. Here's what I'm good at. Here's what I'm looking for. The more you tell them, as Shira said, you never know, the person you may be talking to doesn't know anything, but they say, oh, my brother-in-law or my sister-in-law or my uncle. Right. And then they connect you to that person. And that's the way it works. That's the power of human connection. And that's a lot of times how people find jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'd just like to share that the way you just led into your last comment, Shira, about, you didn't run this event, you're just as a colleague, and taking that mindset with Paul, for example. And I thought, I'm really grateful that he took the time. He contacted me on a Sunday, by the way, Shira. You emailed me and I said, well, I'll wait till Monday. I don't want to bother him on a weekend. He emailed me Sunday with a list of times to connect with him, which was awesome. And I felt really grateful for that. Yeah. And afterward, I thought, what could I do for Paul? How could I, serve him? What are his needs? And we didn't have, that was on my list, but he was very gracious in terms of really, and he's a consultant. So he was asking me all the consultant questions and trying to find out how he could best help me. But I thought of that after I realized, for me personally, that my target audience, or my niche even, is coaches and consultants, because I've trained as a coach, not a consultant, and a branding person, and so it just all the lights went on. I'm thinking, well, maybe I actually could, serve Paul as, and so that was just taking that perspective, is not just going into networking to see what I can get, but I would suggest that should be second to what we should give, right?
This is
Yeah.
what you just said. I mean,
Yeah.
neon lights, snaps, all that stuff, right? There is a concept that's called being a go-giver. There's actually a book by the name, very famous book, it's a little red book, just called The Go-Giver.
Yeah, I read that one. Yeah, it's a good book.
Yeah, it's called, there's actually a movement around it, and it's about giving value to people, and it's exactly what you're talking about in all of our areas of our life, for sure. And certainly in networking, especially when someone's given of their time for you, make sure that you try to help them. And so a thing to mention, and I know, Judy, you happen to think of it after the call, but what you guys can do is bake this into your calls, whatever networking call you have. How can I help you? What are your needs? Are you trying to look for any connections that you're trying to make? Happy to open up my Rolodex, right? And you just make sure that it's either somewhere during the call or certainly by the end of the call that you're asking that question. People will be like, well, thanks for asking. And it shows that you're a good giver.
Yeah, let me go a little bit deeper on that, because what will happen with a lot of people, they'll say just what Shira said. Well, thanks so much. That's very nice.
Right.
But they won't give you, here's specifically what you can do to give back to me. Okay. And then the second thing to remember is that in many, many cases, you're not going to be able to give in the moment. You'd like to, but you can't. So just as you described, Judah, you thought about it, and a little bit later you started to think, oh, I might be able to give back in this way. It might be an article you see next week and you send it to that person, or you email them and say, hey, I saw this article, would you be interested in it? Or you realize there's somebody in your network that Paul might want to connect with. So it could be a week later, it could be 2 months later. But again, that just demonstrates to the person that, they've helped you, you're grateful, and you want to make sure you can give back to them whenever and wherever you can.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome.
to go at a higher level here, how we all have different personalities, right? If any of us would take a personality test, we'd probably have a range of personality styles, right, on this very call. Well, there's a kind of a persona that Vern and I have, and I think that I suspect, knowing some of you that I do offline, that some of you I think also adopt this, but Vern and I for sure, we're what we call connectors. Okay, we just are. We were born that way. God gifted us that way. We can't help ourselves. Not everybody is born a connector, right? There's some people who are born administrators or whatever else, but we happen to have that particular gift, which is why we're trying to impart this to you. For us, it comes naturally. It doesn't come naturally for a lot of people. Vern and I are always thinking, when we're talking to anybody, literally, we can't help ourselves. We're like, oh, who can they meet? And how can I help? And we're making connections. We just do that like water. It's natural to us. It is not natural to everybody else. We get that, which is why we do what we do. Why we're telling you, advising you like this. You can have, even if you don't become a full capital C connector, you can still have the connector lowercase c when in your life, certainly, and certainly in your job search, if you just sort of adopt that lens, put those little, sunglass shades right over your the connector lens, and always think to yourself, how can I be of help to somebody? Every person I talk to. I was in a retail establishment yesterday, and I was just talking to somebody in line. We just, struck up a conversation, and the person was saying to me, funny, Becky, he was an accounting business. And he knew what I do. He's like, he's just asking me some random advice. I'm like, oh, you should talk to so-and-so. I'm like, I can't help it. Okay? but I just want to impart that to you to say, be always thinking about how you can be a go-giver, how you can connect two people together, how you can offer a resource, help them out with something. Just right? Pay it forward.
Yeah.
Pay it forward.
And everything Shira just said is part of the reason that I'm so passionate about contacts count and why I bought the company.
Yeah.
Because while Shira and I have those natural skills, one of the things that we've demonstrated over and over again at contacts count, a lot of the competencies and the skills and behaviors can be learned. Now, you may not get to the level of Shira and I, but you can certainly get better at learning how to recognize the power of giving, the power of human connection, and the little things that you can do along the way to continually improve your ability to do that. Wow.
So, Ty?
A couple thoughts here is one is during the conversation or in their LinkedIn profile, if they're connected to a specific charity, you could maybe say, oh, I see that you're connected to Charity X. Could I help out with that volunteer effort?
Yeah.
One way to give back. Another
Yeah.
way is, I think if they would mention children and something connects, oh, could I help your child with this? Someone said one time, the most powerful thing you can do is help somebody's child.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep.
It's a good one. I'd like to share something just personally for this, a growth element here was when I was, Shira hooked me up with, I'm the guy who's like putting in these applications for Booz Allen and getting the, the Dear John letter, thanks for applying, but we decided to go with somebody else. So I'm not feeling so great about myself. And now suddenly I am senior vice president. Am I reading that right? So I'm like at Booz Allen, the company I really want to work at. And I was like, oh, where can I hide? How can I, escape this for a moment? And then of course I didn't, I went with that. But then when I thought even more like, okay, well then maybe I could actually help this guy, maybe I could actually give to this guy, or how could I? Like as simple as reading his blog and giving it a thumb up. He just did his first blog post. It was a good post, give him a thumbs up. Yeah. But just thinking about that, but then, and as Vern and I think Vern especially was saying, then to actually make a gift, say, hey, I can help you this way if you'd like. And actually, speaking to Vern and I had a very nice conversation, and I want to follow up with Vern because I've been thinking, how can I help Vern? And so anyway, I think so. For me, it's been an empowering moment. I've taken it as an empowering moment, and I would offer that we all try and do that. And it was scary, but but then it also realized, oh, I do have this to give, and I really do. Actually, that is my, who I want to serve, coaches and consultants. It's been with me for a long time. So it just, the synergy of all this, bringing things out in us, I just want to share that, the power of that.
And to your point, Judah, there's actually so much you can learn through your job search. Treat this whole experience as a learning opportunity. Learning about yourself, learning about how you can serve, learning about other people, all the people that you're meeting, all the people you're giving to. I mean, it's a powerful thing. It's a humbling thing too. And we all need more humility, every one of us, right? It's a faith building thing. There's just so many lessons that God can teach us through a job search. Be open, listen, be aware, right? Lord, what can I learn from my job search today? What's one thing that I can take away at the end of the day? What one thing did I learn? What one person did I help? What thing did I give to somebody, right? You always want to have this sort of open and learning. It shouldn't be a frustrating process, even though I know it can feel that way, but how can you flip it around to make it a positive? Say, well, this didn't work. I'm going to learn something from that, right? So I met this person. I helped somebody in their own job search, made a connection. Somebody connected me. What did I learn? How did I help? Right? All right. Maybe one more question before we wrap up and go to the prayer? Okay. So, as per usual, we'll wrap up right now, and I'm going to stay on for a short prayer call for those of you who want to join me, and look forward to seeing everybody next week. And bring your friends. We've got more room on Zoom, so feel free to introduce people. All right.
Thank
Have a
you.
blessed
Sure,
day.
everybody. Have a good week.